Welcome back, everybody, to the sSEC Weekly Show. I'm your host, Ezeco, and we are going to be checking in part two of our basketball preseason preview for the sSEC. If you're a little bit confused and you're here, this is not real college basketball. It's not real college football. It's not the real SEC. This is Simulation Football Association, where we are now also doing basketball as football season winds down. We're currently in bowls and college football playoff season. We are starting to ramp up for basketball. Tuscan's putting on the last touches for it, getting that recruiting interface looking real nice, and it's coming soon. It'll be here before you know it, and I'm really excited. I know a lot of other people excited. So if you're interested in that kind of gets you going a little bit, check down in the description. Check out our website. Give it a look. There's lots of teams open. 172 teams in our Division One college basketball. Plenty of spots for you to take over a team and lead them to NCAA tournament and national championship. But let's continue on with our preview of the SEC. We checked out Auburn and Arkansas and Alabama last time. This time we're going to be checking out the meat. It's going to be all team previews this time, starting off with the Florida Gators. Now, Florida, you want to be better than they are. And we kind of talked about this a little last episode too, where your recruiting stars are not super indicative of what kind of player you're going to be, and they can be very misleading. And we're seeing that right immediately in your face with Daniel Garcia, who was a 3-star in his recruitment, a 5'10 guard who's now a senior, and he has exploded. He is all over the board with A's. And for him to have a D in his defense and a C in his rebounding, those are either high on the end and the rest of the A's are average for him to be an A overall, or all of his A's are super high. So he is an awesome scorer who can just light it up anywhere on the court. He 2 points, mid-range, three-pointers, slash the basket. He is the guy Florida is going to have to rely on. But here's the problem. He's the only guy they've got, really. Curtis Johnson is another great player that they have. He can score from pretty much anywhere with his A in finishing, B in 3-point and 2-point. So he's a great winger at 6'8" forward. And he's only a junior, so next year he's going to be lights out. But he cannot handle the ball very well. He's going to cause problems for the rest of the team with his inability to handle the ball very well. Adam Muskus is another good shooter for them. A in 2-point, A in 3-point, pretty decent finishing, and he can handle the ball, but he can't rebound. Now, he's only a guard. He's a 6'5" guard, so you're not needing to be relying on a guy like that to rebound. But remember what we talked about last episode with rebounding. Your entire team metrics matter for rebounding. So he's pulling everybody down with his inability to rebound. Hung Hang, which is a great name. Maybe one day we'll do a top 25 of great names because there are some great names in this college basketball. But Hung Hang is a good one. He is a good shooter as well. And he's pretty much a solid option all over the court for the Gators. A B overall with a B in 2-point shooting, an A 3-point shooter, B finishing, A ball work, C rebounding, B defense. That is the guy you want to build your team around. On a great team, he's not going to be your number one, but he's definitely going to be your number 2 or 3. So you've got Daniel Garcia, you've got Hung Hang, you've got Adam Muskus. But then really, where are you looking? Curtis Johnson's a good shooter, but he's got the same problem that we just talked about. He was the one we were talking about. He cannot handle the ball. Vernon Wallach's a decent option for finishing. Forget about it on 3-pointer, but he's a decent scorer otherwise. Daryl McNett, he's really good everywhere except for the mid-range, which is typically unusual. That's not really where you see it, you think. But Daryl McNett's going to be the guy that they look at in a couple years as well, with him only being a sophomore and a three-star sophomore, and a 7-footer. When height starts to matter in this game, those 7-footers are going to be insane. And Florida has 2 of them that will be on the roster next year in Vernon Wallach and Daniel McNabb. Unless Vernon Wallach decides to declare for the NBA, which he could. That is another thing that these coaches have to understand. This is different than the college football where in our sim, they don't declare early. When you grab a guy in recruiting for college football, they're there all 4 years. That is not the same for college basketball. Guys can and will declare for the NBA draft early. So you've got to be prepared for that to happen. And Vernon Wallach is a guy who could think about going to the NBA. Curtis Johnson is a guy who could think about going to the NBA. I don't think that they should. I don't think they would be good NBA players with their skill set right now. But you've got to follow the money, So Daniel Garcia is going to be a guy to watch to be possibly on an NBA roster next year. Even with his bad defense, he's got a lot of upside with his scoring. But back to the team as a whole, defensively, I'm not in love with the Gators defense. It's not bad, but you have a few D guys in there who are really going to bring you down. Rebounding, I'm even less impressed. You have some really good rebounders there, and Maloney, Johnson, and Wallach, but you have really average to below average guys who are going to pull it down. So you've got a below average defense, a below average rebounding, and really your scoring is not much to hang your hat on. They're great at finishing, so really close to the back. And this is a trope we're going to see all over college basketball. Teams are really good at finishing because there's a lot of big men in college basketball for us. And so teams are going to be really good close to the basket. But whether it's posting or slashing, Florida's going to be good there. 3-point, they're good in points, right? You've got Muscat's hanging Garcia who can all shoot it really well. Johnson's a decent shooter. Herrera's a great shooter. McNett's a good shooter. But then you've got guys who are really bad. There's not much other way to say it. They're not good shooters from the 3-point. So do you take the risk of trying to put your value into 3-point, hoping that those guys are going to be the ones taking the shots? And then their 2-point shooting is really just average. There's no glaring awfulness besides Maloney, but there's really not a lot great there. So they're great finishers. They're okay at 3-point, and they're okay at 2-point. I don't see for Florida where they can be successful. It's a complicated roster that doesn't have a whole lot of consistency and doesn't have anything to really rely on. So it's unfortunate because Daniel Garcia is a great player. He's somebody that we're going to be watching for individual awards. But as a whole, I don't think Florida is going to be successful. Now, if we look at their out-of-conference slate, it's tough. I mean, this one is tough. They're taking on Iowa State first game of the season. Just like Auburn is taking on TCU very first game of the season. That's a tough game, right? There's no way around it. That is a tough game. Then they're going to take on UCLA, who's a really good team. Wichita State, who probably should be in one of our top 25. Wichita State is probably the best team in the American Athletic Conference. I have Wichita State picked to win that conference. Providence, you never sleep on Providence ever. And then they're going to TCU for the Big 12 Challenge. So it's the same that we've seen with the 3 teams we've already previewed. They've got a tough team who doesn't have a lot to rely on, a tough out-of-conference schedule, and then coming into the SEC, they're not going to be one of the better teams. So it's going to be a rough season for them where they're going to miss the NCAA tournament, I think. That's really all I can say. Checking in next, it's going to be Georgia Bulldogs. Now, This is really exciting. I do not think that as a whole, Georgia will be very good, but Georgia has one of the best players in the country on their team. Bar none, Joseph Swinson is one of the best players in the country, and I am emphasizing every point of that because watch him. If Georgia is successful at all, it is going to be because of Joseph Swinson and nobody else. That's not to say that Georgia doesn't have good players. Michael Turner's a really good forward. Not a great shooter, but he's a good defender. He's a good rebounder. He's great close to the basket. He's an A overall guy who's a senior. But as a 6'7" forward, you kind of want to see him be able to have a better shot from the 2 and the 3. But an A-plus potential, maybe next year, if he can get into the NBA, which is going to be tough for him, I think. If he can get into the NBA, then he has a promising career with an A-plus potential. Joseph Swanson's even higher. I just noticed that he had an A-plus potential, and he might be close to maxed out on all of his skills already. I mean, this dude is insane. So not just watch for him this year, watch for him in the NBA, because the moment he hits the NBA next season, he is going to be one of the best players there. Looking at the rest of the roster, John Cowart's a good guy. He's an elite defender, an elite rebounder who's really good close to the basket, but again, not good anywhere else. Guy Reese, great ball work guy, great 2-point shooter, really good 3-point shooter, terrible defender, but he's also 5'11". I mean, how much can you expect a 5'11" guy to defend? And when I say height doesn't matter, it does not matter, but you can see some patterns in the generation, I guess, of players where your 5'11" guys are not good defenders. And even though height isn't mattering in the sim itself, it does seem to be matter a little bit within the player generation. So he's 5'11", he's not a good defender whatsoever. Ralph Cox, an elite level defender who can score close to the basket, pretty good in the mid-range as well, but you can't rely on him for much else. And Don Zimmerman, we talked about this before, right? Where your stars are not super indicative of who you're going to be. A 4-star who cannot shoot a 2-point mid-range shot whatsoever. If he's in the mid-range, just get the ball out of his hands, right? And he's not a good ball work guy, but he's a 4-star player who's still an A overall, which means his rebounding and defense is awesome. I mean, could be one of the best defenders in the entire game, but that's not going to win you the game, and it's not going to help your team as much as it needs to. So he's a 4-star guy, but he's not going to play at a 4-star level, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong, of course, but I just don't see it. And then you've got Prakasi, who's a 6'9" center sophomore who's a great finisher, right? So defensively, you've got some really good defenders. You've got 5 guys who are awesome defenders for Georgia. The rest, forget about it. So a total mixed bag there. Rebounding wise, Georgia's pretty average. Swinson, Coward, Zimmerman, all great rebounders. You got a couple more guys who are really good rebounders, but then the others are just bringing it down. It's not a great rebounding team. It's not awful. You could do a whole lot worse, but it's not enough, I think, to offset the bad. Scoring-wise, it's another case of this is an awesome, excellent even, close to the basket scoring team. Mostly post up. There's a couple slashers in there with Guy Reese and John Crystal. Those guys can slash to the basket very nicely, but mostly they've got a post game. 3-point shot is incredibly streaky. There's a couple guys there who can shoot the most. Everybody cannot shoot beyond the arc. Mid-range is really very similar. You've got some guys who can shoot the mid-range shot, But if Georgia's going to be successful, not only does Swinson have to play as the absolute best player, not on the court, but on the court of any court every night. But he can only play 31 minutes a game. So I just don't see it. And that sucks because he's going to be awesome to watch. Checking out their offensive out of conference schedule, it's not the worst. They actually don't get into the Big 12 challenge. Big 12, of course, only having 10 teams. SEC having 14 teams. There's 4 SEC teams that are not going to make it in challenge. Georgia being one of them. So that week they're going to be playing Clemson instead. They pick up Evansville. Evansville's not a terrible team. They're probably better than Georgia. That will be a good game to watch because Evansville as a team is pretty good. Georgia has great individual players. So if you're curious about whether or not the whole team is going to matter versus individuals, that's a game to watch. Outside of that, they don't have the worst schedule. They do play Clemson in Georgia twice, which is a scheduling oversight that maybe somebody that I'm not pointing at myself should have seen and fixed, but whatever. They're playing 3 other Georgia teams in Georgia Southern, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. I don't see a whole lot of threat for Georgia here. So they have a good out-of-conference schedule. Should help them out a little bit. And with how not great the rest of the SEC is, I think that will help them to get to the bubble. It's going to be tough for Georgia to make the NCAA tournament. I think they are a shoe-in for the NIT, even if they don't make the NCAA. But they'll be right on the bubble to get into the tournament. Looking at our next team, it's going to be the Kentucky Wildcats. I know I spent a long time on Georgia there. I might spend just as much, if not more, time on Kentucky because this is my team. But Kentucky is one of the best teams in the SEC as well. So they're exciting to look at. I don't have them pegged as the best. I have that saved for somebody else. But they are, to me, the second best. And I'm going to say it again. But your stars don't matter. Look at Cyrus Rice. This is a 7'1 center who was a 2-star coming out of high school, and he's an A value overall. And then right below him, you even have Harry Schaefer, who's a 2-star coming out, a 6'8 forward who's now a senior. He's a B overall, so he didn't develop as well. Maybe he started off lower, but those are great players. Those are great guys for any team. And I get them on mine. Lawrence Bennett is a great defender, a great rebounder, really good into the basket. Not much else. A 1-star who is a C overall, and I think what is happening with him is his 2-point and 3-point shooting is just so bad. It's being brought down by everything. It's bringing down everything else. Lawrence Bennett's a guy who I think you can rely on at 7'1". That's 1, 2. Kentucky has 3 7-footers. Now 2 of them are graduating this year. Douglas Dupois will be here next year. So if height starts to matter next season, they're in good shape. But that's 2 7'1" guys on the court right now for Kentucky who are really good. Harry Schaefer's a great guy as well. 2-point, 3-point shooting great, finishing great as well. Good rebounder, good defense. Douglas Dupois, great finisher. Decent shooter, not the best, of course. We've seen better already, but he'll be good. Skipping down a little bit, Gerard Chasen. That's a 4-star guy who's really developing well as a junior. He might end up declaring for the draft next year, at the end of this year, because he is a really good player. His 3-point shot's not where you see some other guys, but he's also a 6'7" forward. So he's playing your small forward, your power forward who can step out a little bit. He can shoot the 3. You just don't want him shooting it. But that's a great guy to rely on as well. Anthony Bestwick, who's a D overall guy, but is an awesome 2-point shooter, an awesome 3-point shooter, can even get under the basket a little bit and slash to score, but he's got awesome ball handling skills. So that's kind of your power. That's your consummate point guard right there, right? awesome with the ball handling, can shoot really good. Just don't rely on him to do too much else. But there's another 5'10" guy who's awful at defense. Joshua Colfer, that's another 4-star recruit for Kentucky. 2-point shooting, 3-point shooting, all A's. He's a great finisher as well. Could have some more to be desired on defense and rebounding, but he's only a sophomore, so those skills are going to continue developing. At a 4-star, he's where you're wanting him to be as a sophomore. Maybe a little bit higher. You can see some 4-star sophomores who are better, but Joshua Colfer's a solid guy. He's going to be solid next year as well. Then you get John Searcy. John Searcy's a 4-star guy who I honestly don't think deserves the 4-star rating that he got. He probably should be a 3-star guy, but his defense and rebound are so good. They're pulling up his stars, I think, to make him much better. But the guy to really watch for Kentucky is Daryl Scott. He's a 5-star recruit. I don't think he's the only 5-star recruit in the SEC. We'll find out. Of course, we're going to go through every team, but he's the only one I can think of off the top of my head with an F potential. So that's going to be tough for me next season with a 5-star guy who's not developing the way you want him to. He's already really good, right? He's an awesome 2-point shooter. He's got awesome ball handling skills. He's a really good slasher. Can shoot the 3. He's an okay defender, good rebounder, but can he continue to develop? Because your 5-star guys are ones who are going to be declaring for the draft early if they pan out. And I don't want to call him a bust already when I'm just looking at potential, but it's going to be tough, right? It's going to be tough for Daryl to succeed. Looking at the team as a whole, defensively, Kentucky has a lot to be desired. You've got some great defenders in Cyrus Rice, really good defenders in Stout, Chasson, Bennett, Searcy, and Wersner. But these guys are not going to be seeing the floor the entire time, and the rest of the team is really pulling it down. So defensively, Kentucky, not great. Pretty average, maybe even below average. Rebounding, they're a pretty good team. There's a couple in there who are going to bring the total down, but with Bennett and Schaefer and Dupois and Chason being such excellent rebounders and other guys who are really good at rebounding as well, I think they're going to be fine at rebounding. Ball work, pretty good to average. I don't think we'll have too much trouble with with turnovers. It's going to be something to watch. But scoring-wise, they're all over the place, right? You've got really good guys close to the basket and some guys who are not great. In fact, I'd say Kentucky's strength is close to the basket. That's where they're going to live and die by. 3-point, you've got really good shooters in Colfer, Hussein, and Grimes, and then you got really bad shooters. 2-point, much of the same. Stout, Chasen, Bestwick, Colfer, and Scott all can fill it up from the mid-range. You've got some guys who can kind of shoot as well, but then you have some guys who can't shoot at all. So Kentucky has a total mixed bag. It's going to be tough. It's going to rely on Kentucky's coaching. So looking at me, pointing 2 thumbs at myself, how well can you coach Kentucky and manage those minutes, manage that roster? That's going to dictate how far they go. In addition to their out-of-conference schedule. So let's take a look at that real quick. Western Kentucky, great team, right? Of course they are. Then we have the Champions Classic in Michigan State, who's a decent team. I actually don't think they're very good. Tulane is a good team. UCLA for the SimBBA Classic. That's the CBS Sports Classic that we've renamed to the SimBBA Classic. UCLA's not terrible, right? Taking on Gonzaga, who's not good. I'll be honest, Gonzaga's not good. Reviving the Indiana rivalry in a neutral game. The Louisville game is going to be in Lexington this year, and neither one of those teams are very good, in my opinion. Louisville actually worse. They're not very good. As much as Louisville is suffering and struggling in the real world, the SimBBA Louisville is in pretty much the same shape. West Virginia is the Big 12 challenge. I don't think West Virginia is very good. My point here is that the out-of-conference schedule for Kentucky is very favorable. There's not a lot of tough matchups for them, so they're going to rack up some wins there. The pitfall for it will be overestimating their team. So that brings them down a little bit in my estimation because I think they'll get a big head. They'll think they're much better than they are. They'll hit the SEC and I'm like, oh, we're not as good as we thought. So I think Kentucky's going to be making the NCAA tournament. They're our first team that we've previewed that I'm saying they're going to make it. And I think they'll make it to the round of 32, but I think they crash out in the second round with some team that just says, hey, we're better. We understand our team. You don't. We're better. So that's Kentucky. Let's move on to our next team, looking at the LSU Tigers. Now, LSU also has one of the best players in the country. And here's a 5-star. So there are other 5-stars. Of course there are, right? Kentucky doesn't have the only one. William Woodard is a 5-star senior, and that's the 5 stars you want to be seeing when they get to their senior year, if they make it to their senior year. Most of your 5 stars probably aren't going to make it to their senior year. The NBA money is going to be calling, right? Money bag is going to be dropping. William Woodard has stuck it out all 4 years, a 5'11 guard. He's a senior. His stamina is not great. He can only play 29 minutes. That's still 3/4 of the game, but you want him to be able to play more. But he's awesome, right? I mean, look at all that. That's a solid row of A's followed up by a B. It's a 5'11 guy who can defend. I mean, insane. And then they've got a smattering of other pretty good players as well. But William Woodard is the guy to watch for LSU in the same way that Swinson is the guy to watch for Georgia. Defensively, as a whole, I'm not impressed with LSU at all. They're very below average. You've got Eakins and Thomas who are elite level defenders. You've got a couple more guys who can defend, but the rest of the team is just pretty bad. So that's kind of a Swiss cheese offense or a Swiss cheese defense. It's not a recipe for success. It's going to be tough for them. Rebounding wise, they're actually pretty good in my opinion. We've got a lot of guys who are average to above average rebounders, plus Pennington, who's an elite rebounder. I think they're going to be okay in the rebounding department, so not worried about them there. Ball work, they'll be okay. I don't foresee too many terrible possessions for LSU. They'll be fine. It's where are they going to score? Finishing, they're okay. I think they're pretty average. Woodard and Thomas are elite level scorers. You've got a few more guys who are really pretty good, but not great in that department. 3-point shot is even worse. I think they're fairly bad. There's a couple guys who can shoot, of course. Woodard is the name we're just going to keep saying. He can score anywhere he wants. You give him the ball, he will put it in the basket. But outside of him, who else is going to score? Brown and Gullett are decent shooters from 3-point. Eakins is a good shooter. Herrera is a good shooter. Herrera is actually one of the better shooters on the team, of course, as well as Brown and Gullett. So those 4, Herrera, Woodard, Brown, and Gullett, are going to be the ones you have to rely on. And even Gannon, who is a sneaky pick down there. We'll talk about him in a second. But the rest of the team doesn't have the consistency that LSU is going to need to be successful, I think. It's going to be tough for LSU. We'll see. Now, Gannon, real quick on him, that's a 5'10 guard freshman who's a 4-star recruit. B's across the board until you get to his defense, and he's really kind of impressive on defense and rebounding. For a 5'10 guy to be a C in rebounding and defense, that is a guy to watch for next season. He probably won't be in Baton Rouge after next season because the NBA is going to be calling. He's going to be good. Watch him. So let's take a quick look at LSU's out-of-conference scheduling. They also are not making the Big 12 Challenge. They're going to be taking on Notre Dame that week. I am not seeing too many tough matchups for LSU here. In fact, I don't think there's a team on here that I would call out as one that I have previewed in my forum previews that I'm really scared of. I don't think I've previewed Loyola Chicago's conference or George Mason's conference, so I don't know exactly how good they are, but the rest of them, I'm just not scared for LSU. So that's a favorable out-of-conference schedule to go into a weak SEC where while LSU is decent, I think you're going to have more losses than they can really deal with. So I've got LSU as a bubble team. I don't think you're going to make it. I think they'll make the NIT. I think they'll be fine there. They won't make it very far in the NIT. But maybe they can squeak out some surprise wins behind Woodard and make it into the NCAA tournament. So I've got them as a bubble team. Checking on our next team, it's going to be the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Now, the Bulldogs are all over the place, right? Like you can already see it with the A's. All over the place. They've got a 4-star recruit who I don't think it should have been a 4-star because your recruiting stars deal with your full overall, right? They don't necessarily deal with how effective you're going to be on a team. Gerald Brown is a 4-star, 7'1" center who's a senior this year. An A overall, but that's all pulled up by his finishing, his rebounding, and his defense. Of course, you don't expect a 7'1" guy to shoot a 3-pointer, so we'll just ignore that. But he's not good on the mid-range either. So he's an elite level defender. He's an elite level rebounder. But that's not going to win you the game. It'll help. Obviously, it's going to help, but it's not going to win you the game. And I'm not seeing very many guys on this roster for Mississippi State who can be relied on to win the game for them. Salvatore Licklider, remember we talked about the top 25 names? Licklider, like that better. Licklitter's a top 25 name, right? Licklitter's a great scorer. He's great all over the board. He's a guy you can expect to be on some NBA draft boards if he can put up the numbers this season. It's going to be tough for him to make a roster and maybe sneak into that lower second round for the NBA draft, but he's a really good player. He's a great mid-range shot. He's an elite level rebounder, good on defense, good everywhere else, right? Licklitter's a good player for Mississippi State. Mark Jones is a great shooter. He can shoot from 2-point. He can shoot from 3-point. He's not a terrible slasher either. He can get close to the basket and score a little bit with great handles for the ball. So you're not going to expect him to give it up, and you can expect him to dish it out for some assists. Great rebounder, terrible defender. I mean, a 6'5" guard shouldn't be terrible at defense, but here we are. That's what's going to hold them back. And when you look at Mississippi State as a whole, defensively, they are being held back. Brown, Abdich, and Barrett are all elite defenders who are backed up by guys who are not good at defense. So that pulls the entire team down to an average level defensive team. Rebounding, I think they're really good. A whole lot of A's with Licklider, Brown, Haas, and Barrett, all elite level defenders, backed up by some pretty good defenders as well. Ball work, pretty average, maybe even above average, so I don't expect too many awful mistakes from Mississippi State for turnovers. 2-point shooting, 3-point shooting, not impressed. I'm just going to flat out say it, not impressed at all. Don't think they're going to be super successful there, which is unfortunate because Licklider and Jones are awesome shooters and awesome scorers. But Mississippi State is going to have to rely on their under-the-basket scoring where they're still just slightly above average. You see the 5As there of guys who are all really good under the basket. And then Licklider and Haas and Boogert and Oldham are pretty good shooters underneath the basket as well, backed up by some guys who are fairly average. It's it's a good under the basket shooting team who cannot shoot anywhere else. So they're going to have to 100% rely underneath the basket. And I just don't see that being a recipe for success. So taking a look at their out of conference schedule, this one's actually tough. I mean, they're taking on the number 2 preseason, our preseason number 2 team. The very first game, straight out of the gate, coming down to Starkville is going to be Utah. Now, like I said, I wasn't super impressed with Utah, but they're much better than Mississippi State. Virginia's a decent team. They can't be playing Utah twice, can they? That's got to be a scheduling problem. If they're playing Utah twice, I might have to go fix that schedule. But they also have to play Oklahoma, and then they're playing Baylor at Baylor for the Big 12 Challenge. It's a tough out-of-conference schedule for Mississippi State. There's not a whole lot of wins. They might win as much as they lose. So a 50-50 out-of-conference schedule going into SEC where they're not going to be one of the better teams. I've got Mississippi State missing the NCAA tournament. Sorry, not sorry. Checking in with one more team, the Missouri Tigers. Now this is a good team. No 5-star recruits, but we've talked about how that doesn't matter because look at the level of talent on Missouri. Christopher Miramontes is a 3-star guy who was under-recruited and undervalued coming out of high school. He's an A overall. He's a contender to go into the NBA and make some noise. Awesome shooter, can shoot really from anywhere on the court. And an elite level defender and rebounder at only 6'1", that's a guy you want on your team. And Kerry White's a great guy. You want him to be able to shoot the 3-pointer more, but with Miramontes and then below him Polanco on the team, you can deal with him not being able to shoot a 3-pointer, right? Polanco, awesome shooter, fills it up from anywhere on the court. He can't rebound, but he's also only 6 feet tall, so I'm not expecting him to rebound too much. Terry Ewing's a good option for them as well. Skipping down a little bit here, James Crespin, good option for them all the way around, except for he's a terrible defender. And that, if Missouri is weak on anything, it's how average their defense seems to be, right? You've got some guys who are pretty good at defense. Miramontes, White, Polanco, Benton, Ellison. These are all guys you can rely on to be good defenders. But then they're pulled down. So I think they'll be okay because of the amount of scoring that they're going to be able to do. It's just the defense is a little worrying for Missouri. So they're not going to be able to go as far as you would want them to in the postseason because their defense cannot be that level that it needs to be. Rebounding-wise, they're average to above average. You've got some elite level rebounders there. But the team's pulled down by a couple guys who are just average or bad, in the case of Polanco. Ball work, I don't expect any mistakes from Missouri. This is a smart team. They've got good handles on the ball. They're not going to be a problem there. Underneath the basket, Missouri is absolutely deadly. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys who are A overall in finishing, and then another handful of guys who are Bs, and you only have 3 guys who are Cs. This is an elite level finishing team who can score at will underneath the basket. 3-point wise, not great. You've got a couple guys who can shoot, nobody else can. Miramontes and Polanco and Gagliano, they're going to be affected by the fact that when you set that game plan, you cannot set it to rely on the 3-point shot. Now, what you can set it to rely on besides finishing is your 2-point shot, because you've got tons of guys who can shoot from the 2-point. I've even missed one. Brian Benton is an A-level 2-point shooter. So you've got 6 guys who are A's in 2-point shooting. That's even better than your finishing. And while, yes, you have a guy down there who's a D, just don't play him. I mean, he's not good at it anyway, right? James Legg, I'm sorry, I don't like to call out guys because if we're pretending these guys are actual kids, an 18-year-old kid, but he's not good, right? He sit him on the bench. Everybody else can shoot from anywhere on the court almost. So I'm scared of Missouri. If I'm being honest, if I'm scared of any team in the SEC, it's Missouri, because they just have the entire package. And if you look at their out of conference schedule, it's pretty favorable. They don't get the Big 12 challenge. They somehow missed that, so they're gonna take on Old Dominion that week, and I don't see very many, if any, teams on their schedule that are very scary. Maybe Oklahoma State. Actually, I don't think so. I think the Cowboys pretty bad. If I'm trying to remember my previews correctly, so it's entirely possible Missouri goes undefeated in their out of conference, and then comes into the SEC undefeated, and they won't run the table, but they're going to be very good. So they are almost guaranteed to be a lock for the NCAA tournament, and I think they're going to be so good. I think they're going to make it all the way to Sweet 16. There are better teams out there out of conference that they're not playing, obviously, but they'll meet somebody in the Sweet 16. They'll get bounced out of there, but they're going to do well, and they're going to have a strong season. Let's check in with another team, Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss is going to have an unfortunate season. And that's going with looking at guys like Robert Philby, who are very good, but they're backed up by guys who are not very good, right? Defensively, as a team, Ole Miss is pretty bad. They're not awful. They're not the worst team in the country. Those are saved for other teams. Nobody in the SEC is going to be the worst in the country. That is the upside that we have in this conference. But there are some teams that are not great, and Ole Miss is not great at defense. Ball work, they're one of the better teams, as you can see. You got 5 guys who are elite level ball work, so Ole Miss is not going to be turning the ball over. If they have a shot clock violation, if they drop the ball out of bounds, that is going to be a complete unusual experience for you to see Ole Miss do that. But I mean, rebounding, they're okay. They're average. Maybe no. I'm just gonna say average. Finishing, close to the basket, they're really good. You've only got a couple guys who are C's. Everybody else is A's and B's. So actually, they're pretty dangerous underneath the basket. Mid-range, they're even more dangerous, if that's even possible, because you've got guys like Robert Philby, who's going to be one of the best guards, not just in the SEC. He's going to be one of the best guards in the country. Richard Morgan's an awesome guard as well. Jonathan Mickles. All 3 of those 5'10" guys for Ole Miss are going to be really good. But and even three-pointing, their three-point shots, they're not bad. You've got some guys who can really shoot the ball and some guys who really can't. Ole Miss is it's tough. I mean, you see this and you're like, oh, they're a really good shooting team. Oh, they're really bad defensively. So what are they going to do? They're going to be streaky, I think. They're going to have nights where they're great. They're going to have nights where they're awful. They're going to live and die by those shots. Looking at their out-of-conference, this is actually a tough out-of-conference schedule. Kansas State for their Big 12 Challenge, going into Kansas State. Florida International, Week 4B there, going into Florida International. A lot of SEC teams seem to be playing Oklahoma State. I feel like we might be picking on them a little bit, Northern Illinois is not a terrible team. Illinois, not a terrible team. And then starting off the season with Villanova. So a pretty tough out-of-conference schedule for Ole Miss. It's not awful, not the worst, but it's going to be tough. And then they come into the SEC, where they'll be one of the better teams, but I think they might be diminished by the out-of-conference schedule. So I've got Ole Miss as a bubble team. I think they'll make it. If they don't make it, they're definitely going to make the NIT, but it's going to be close. Ole Miss is going to be one of the teams to be watching all season as how well can they pull off what's going on. Another team here, South Carolina Gamecocks. I need to take a breath here because we've already psyched up about Swinson. South Carolina has guys even better. John Schroeder might be the best player in the entire country. And not only might he be the best player in the entire country, he might be top 5 NBA when he hits the NBA. He should be in the NBA right now. The only reason he's not in the NBA is because, on the one hand, nobody was moved to the NBA for their overalls when they might possibly should have been. But if we want to look at it from a storyline standpoint, 2021 season was canceled because COVID year for NBA and college. You'll see that. We had the 2020 season. We didn't have the 2021 season. We have the 2022 season. We're calling it the COVID year. John Schroeder should be in the NBA. If we'd had a season last year, he'd be in it. He'd be one of the top 5 players in the NBA, and I think he's the best player in the country, hands down, even better than Swinson, better than a lot of other guys out there. Watch out for him. And if South Carolina is going to be successful, which I think they will be, I think South Carolina is going to be just fine. It's going to be because of Schroeder. And then behind Schroeder, even as well, is Winstead. Winstead is almost as good, and he's only a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, right? But look at that. Let's just focus for a second on the finishing skill of the entire South Carolina team, who you've got 5 elite level guys, including Schroeder and Winstead. But then you also have Brent Walker, Aziz Shea, and Fwong Garrison, Brent Wilson, all elite level scorers underneath the basket. And then everybody else can shoot just fine underneath there. 3-point shot, not great, obviously. You only have 2 guys who are great shooters there, and William Schulman is not a guy you want to be putting on the floor right now. That's a guy you want a red shirt for next season, with how fairly average to bad he is and everything else. But as a whole, 3-point shooting wise, South Carolina not great. 2-point shooting wise, they're a little bit better, but they're pulled down by some guys who really just can't shoot and really probably don't deserve a spot on an NCAA roster. I hate to say that. We talked about that. I don't like to knock on guys who I look at and like, oh, these are college kids, right? But some of these guys don't deserve to be on a roster. If you could cut them, you should. But as a team, they're fairly above average in 2-point shooting. Defensively, this is kind of the same story as Missouri. They're good, but not great. And in fact, for how bad some of the guys are, they're kind of pulled down into average territory. I'm going to call them an above average defensive team. That might be a little generous. Rebounding is kind of the same way. You've got some guys who are really elite level rebounders. Your same guys: Schroeder, Winstead, Walker, Shea, Rosas. These are guys you can rely on for every facet of the game on the basketball court. But then the rest of the team is pulled down by a lack of effort. So I like South Carolina. I think this is a really good team. I have them contending. I don't think they're as good as Missouri, but I do have them contending for the 3rd spot to the 2nd spot. They'll be right there with Kentucky as the 2nd to 3rd best team in the SEC. Taking a look at their out-of-conference schedule, I mean, what's there to be scared of here? Taking on Iowa State for the Big 12 Challenge, Kansas State again in 3A. There's a lot of SEC teams taking on 2 Big 12 teams. I don't see too many difficult challenges here for South Carolina. So that's a favorable out-of-conference schedule to move into a weak SEC team where they're going to be one of the better teams in the SEC. So I think South Carolina's going to have a really good season. I've got them making the NCAA tournament. crashing out in the round of 32 because just like Kentucky, they're going to meet a team that's much better and much more well-rounded. But I think South Carolina is going to be just fine. I think they're going to be a good team. So with that, that's going to do it. We're going on a little bit long, but we hit most of the teams here in the SEC. We hit the meat and potatoes of it. The best teams that the SEC has to offer. We saw them this season. Those teams are going to have some competition. It's going to be exciting to watch them all season compete against each other, compete against the rest of the country. And there's not much else to say. We have one more part coming up. We're going to check in with the last few teams, and then some other things to kind of wrap up the final previews of the SEC. So, guys, stay tuned for that one to come out. I appreciate you hanging in there. If you are participating in bowl season this season, like I unfortunately am not, good luck in your bowl games that are upcoming. And again, if you've somehow made it this far listening to me drone on about this unfortunate stuff and you are super interested in college basketball simulations, again, check out the stuff in the description. Come check us out. I'll catch you guys next time.